I'm Tarry, Member of Parliament for Ilford South. I'm really sorry that I can't join you today at your event. 27th of November marks a day where the Tamil community, both here in Ilford, across the UK and Europe and globally, remember those that have died resisting state repression in Sri Lanka. In Sri Lanka, Tamil politicians and the relatives of politicians and the war dead are remembered on this day because as a community they faced state repression and violence, and the attempts to be able to remember their own war dead are something which in self they've actually been punished for. And this is clearly wrong, that the war dead that have been commemorated when Tamils are going to their cemeteries, that the Sri Lankan government then went on to bulldoze, is clearly a crime against humanity. And I know this year has sadly been no different, because actually the Tamils of the northeast of Sri Lanka and the UK should be able to commemorate this day, this black day, and to do so in a way with their heads held high. And it's not just me saying this, it's the UN, United Nations, who have been clear that Tamils have got a fundamental right to remember their war dead on November the 27th. And I will continue as a representative of a large Tamil community here in Ilford to put pressure on the British Foreign Secretary to make those representations to the Sri Lankan government that their way of treating the Tamils as they commemorate this day is completely untenable. Because as well as remembering their deceased today, the Tamil community will be looking with concern at how events are currently unfolding on the island of Sri Lanka, and that Sri Lanka's new government have rejected UN resolutions calling for international accountability and a proper mechanism for holding them to account over war crimes that have been alleged to have been committed. And I'm also aware that human rights situation in Sri Lanka for Muslims as well as Tamils is worsening and has got considerably worse in the past few months. The ongoing militarisation of Tamil homelands in the northeast of Sri Lanka and the violent attacks and intimidation on civil society and journalists are also of serious concern. It's something that I speak to my Tamil community here in Ilford about on a regular basis. And the UN again, where the human rights chief has rightly called on the international community to make a much firmer stance on Sri Lanka. And our government here in the UK must take a leading role in calling out the Sri Lankan state and demanding an end to the oppression of the Tamil people. Because I'm really clear that any future trade deals between the UK and Sri Lanka must be linked to human rights, and those conditions must be met to make tangible progress on the UN resolutions that have previously been put in place. And I've, in Parliament on many occasions, consistently urged the Secretary of State for International Trade to do this, and you have my word that I'll continue to do that. Sri Lankan officials have also been accused by the UN of war crimes. This is, for example, General Shavendra Silva. They must, in my view, face targeted sanctions. We've already seen our own government place sanctions on officials in Myanmar who are responsible for the genocide of the Rohingya Muslims, and it's high time they acted on Sri Lanka to bring people to book. Tamil politicians and the wider Tamil community, former UN staffers, international experts and Canadian politicians have recently stated that Tamils in Sri Lanka have faced acts of genocide. And the first step to prevent further acts of genocide is to acknowledge this. And I join calls for the international investigation that would look explicitly into acts of genocide against the Tamil people in Sri Lanka. And finally, I'm also aware that the root cause of the ethnic conflict in Sri Lanka is linked to the colonial past of Britain and our empire. And that is something that we cannot shirk our responsibility for as we hold the ring between these different groups that are in such conflict. And it's our failure to maintain governance structures in the past for different communities to exist peacefully on the island that unfortunately laid so much of the pathway to woe that we've seen unfold over the past decades. But let me be clear, too many lives have been lost in Sri Lanka's conflict, and I'm aware that even in recent weeks, Tamil representatives from Sri Lanka have met policy officials in Washington and in London to ask for international assistance in securing a final political end game that would mean justice and self-determination for the Tamil people within the island of Sri Lanka. And that Britain, in my view, must play a leading role in supporting the Tamil community to get this peaceful political solution so that everyone in Sri Lanka can move forward to a better future. But it must respect the right to self-determination of the Tamil people. The Labour Party, and I will say this again on record, has and always will stand by the Tamil people in their struggle for justice and self-determination.